the Reagan years and the pre-Reagan years, one of the real thinkers and the policy developers of the conservative movement, Don Devine. Don Devine is no stranger to the conservative movement. He's been a foot soldier in this movement. He served as Deputy Director of Political Planning and as Regional Director for President Reagan's presidential campaign. He served as Director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. What I like about him most, he was appointed as Chief Advisor on Federal Personnel by President Reagan, a position in which he successfully saved $6 billion by cutting more than 100,000 bureaucratic slots. That's what we need in Washington, D.C. again.
And more relevant to this panel, he won the Cold War. To me, the answer to this panel's question, what's a conservative foreign policy, is Ronald Reagan's policy. However, as the lady mentioned, kind of one of my jobs has been over the last 30 years here is trying to be the dog in the manger and try to say some things that aren't the most popular things to say to conservatives. Let me ask you a question. Reagan was a tough guy. He was. But sometimes he wasn't. Let's talk recently. What president was it that set a date for an absolute withdrawal time from Iraq? No, it was George Bush. It was George Bush. And Obama, he says he's going to leave, but the Secretary of Defense says maybe not. Who was tougher? How about Afghanistan? Who kept the troop level down and who did the surge? It was George Bush that kept the troop level down. It was Obama that did the surge. In Pakistan, who was more? You just heard Ambassador Bolton say who was the tougher there. It was Obama. He's increased the Predator strikes against the terrorists by 5 times. Even Iran. Look at the sanctions that George Bush proposed and look at the sanctions Obama has proposed. The tougher ones are clearly Obama. Now, my point obviously is not that Obama's tougher than Bush. My point is that being tough isn't always the right thing to do in foreign policy. Look at my president, President Reagan. A top staffer in George Bush's White House said Ronald Reagan was being weak in evacuating the Marines from Lebanon when terrorists blew up the apartment there and killed 200 and some odd of our Marine forces. President Reagan thought maybe it wasn't worth the cost. We're not in Lebanon now. Lebanon seems to have stabilized a bit, maybe. It wasn't, and still, even very recently, George Bush's former director of the FBI said Reagan was weak for removing the troops there. Lebanon, better or worse off in Iraq, Iran? These are just questions I'm asking. Now, I mentioned that Ronald Reagan won the Cold War. Everyone clapped for it. How did he win the Cold War? Sure, he built up the defense. That was critical. Sure, he went and negotiated, refused to give in on the Strategic Defense Initiative. But how did he get there to not give that up by agreeing to negotiate with the head of the evil empire? And he met and Thatcher said the same thing. When they met with him personally, they figured out, I can make a deal with this guy. As long as I move from strength and don't give up our essential interests, I can deal with this guy. You know what one of the major leaders of the conservative movement at the time called Ronald Reagan for agreeing to meet with him and negotiate with him? A useful idiot for the Soviet Union, quote unquote. That's what the leader said. Being tough in foreign policy, engaging in numbers of troops, is not always the right thing to do. Ronald Reagan, his biggest commitment of forces was against a little tiny island that doesn't have the population of a mid-sized city in the United States, Grenada. The only time he put military forces in the field. Not only did, of course, the two Bushes and President Obama, but also Bill Clinton, all of them committed many, many more armed forces to active engagement than Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan used little quick in and out. They go in, send the bombers over Gaddafi's head, knock a couple of buildings out near him, and then get out. Somehow he calmed down for a long time after. He didn't leave 100,000, 200,000 troops. He went in, hit them, got out. Being, quote, tough is not always the best thing. Sometimes it is, but it's not always the best thing to do. Reagan was a passionate believer in peace. Remember, his slogan was peace through strength. Strength, though, is the means. What's the end? Peace. That's what we're about. Now, if you don't believe me, I ask you to read one book. The Andersons, who I know very well, their name escapes me, Annalise and Marty, just wrote a book on Reagan winning the Cold War, and it's passionate, his interest in reducing the threat of nuclear annihilation. That was his burning passion. And remember, he was the first president to actually reduce nuclear weapons. The rest of them signed things saying they would stop the increase, and they didn't even stop. But he was the first one actually to reduce it. I was absolutely and still an absolute supporter of strength. We need a strong, powerful military. But we need to remember also two things. One, it's strength isn't the same as putting American troops' lives at risk. Remember the famous General Patton. He said, our job is not to have Americans spend their lives. The idea is to have the other guys spend their lives. And whenever we can use somebody else to do it, we should do it. And take the advice of Reagan in and out. Remember, the Reagan foreign policy is the conservative policy. And that policy is peace through strength, and do it smart.